I'm Erin, 28 female. I live in a small but cozy city apartment that I've filled with plants and books, my little sanctuary from the world. As a freelance graphic designer, I have the freedom to work from anywhere, which is usually a blessing. This story, however, is about the one time it felt like a curse. It's a story about how a simple accident and 2 weeks of agonizing silence from my family revealed a truth so ugly. It forced me to make a choice I never thought I'd be capable of. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The plan was simple: 2 weeks of digital detox. Or, at least, as much of a detox as a freelance designer can manage. I'd rented a remote cabin nestled deep in the mountains, a place with spotty Wi-Fi and more pine trees than people. For 14 days, my goals were to finish a big branding project for a client, hike every trail within a 5-mile radius, and read at least 3 novels. It was supposed to be a reset button, a chance to disconnect from the constant hum of city life and the low-grade, persistent stress that came with my family. My parents, Jonathan and Susan, weren't malicious people, but our relationship had become strained over the years. They operated on a transactional basis. Love and support were commodities to be exchanged, and lately I hadn't been holding up my end of the bargain, at least in their eyes. The main source of this friction was my cousin, Jessica. She was my aunt's daughter, and since my aunt passed away a few years ago, my parents had taken Jessica under their wing. At 24, she was a whirlwind of manufactured drama and social media aspirations. My parents saw a fragile girl who needed their help. I saw a master manipulator who knew exactly which buttons to push to get what she wanted. They paid her rent, covered her car insurance, and funded her influencer lifestyle, which mostly consisted of buying clothes she'd wear for one photo and then return. In return, Jessica played the part of the perfect, grateful niece, always available for family dinners, always ready with a compliment for my mom's cooking or my dad's latest story. My refusal to participate in this charade, to praise Jessica for her non-existent achievements, branded me as difficult and jealous. "She's had a hard life, Erin," my mom would say, her voice laced with disappointment. "The least you could do is be supportive." So I chose distance. I kept my calls with them brief and my visits infrequent. This cabin trip was my escape from all of it. I arrived on a sunny Saturday, the air crisp and clean. The cabin was perfect, small, rustic, with a stone fireplace and a wide porch that overlooked a dense forest. The owner, a friendly guy named Ben, had left a stack of firewood, a map of the local trails, and a handwritten note with his number, saying to call if I needed anything at all. For the first 3 days, it was bliss. I worked in the mornings, the silence broken only by the sound of my keyboard and the chirping of birds. In the afternoons, I'd pack a water bottle and a snack and explore the trails. The forest was breathtaking, a cathedral of green and gold. I felt my shoulders, perpetually tensed, finally begin to relax. I sent my parents a quick text on the first night, made it to the cabin safely. "It's beautiful here. We'll be mostly offline, but we'll check in if I can. Love you." My mom replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. That was the last I'd hear from them. The accident happened on the 4th day. I was on a trail marked as moderate, one I'd been looking forward to. It snaked up the side of the mountain, promising a panoramic view at the summit. The path was uneven, littered with loose rocks and tangled roots. I was being careful, watching my footing, but one moment of distraction was all it took. I glanced up to admire a hawk circling overhead, and my right foot came down awkwardly on a wet, moss-covered stone. There was a sickening crack, a sound that seemed to echo through the silent woods, followed by a surge of white-hot pain. I crumpled to the ground, my leg twisted beneath me at an unnatural angle. I knew instantly that it was bad. My ankle swelled up within minutes, turning a bruised, angry purple. The pain was nauseating. Panic began to set in. I was at least 2 miles from the cabin, my phone had no signal, and I hadn't seen another soul all day. Getting back was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I found a sturdy fallen branch to use as a crutch and began the slow, agonizing process of dragging myself back down the trail. Every step sent a fresh wave of agony through my leg. It took me over 3 hours, a journey that had taken less than one on the way up. By the time I stumbled onto the cabin porch, I was sobbing, covered in dirt, and on the verge of passing out. In C. I collapsed onto the floor, my mind racing. I couldn't drive. The nearest town with a hospital was 40 miles away on winding mountain roads. My phone was still useless. My only hope was the cabin's landline. With trembling hands, I pulled myself over to the small table where it sat, my leg throbbing with a rhythm that matched my pounding heart. My first call was to my dad. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. "Dad, it's me," I gasped, my voice hoarse. "I'm at the cabin. I had an accident. I think I broke my leg. I can't drive. Please, please call me back." I left a similar message for my mom, then I tried them both again, and again, no answer. I felt a cold dread creep into my stomach, a feeling far worse than the physical pain. They knew where I was. They knew I was alone. Why weren't they answering? My final call was to Ben, the cabin owner. He answered on the second ring. "Ben, it's Aaron from the cabin on Ridge Road," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need help. I fell on a trail. My leg is broken." His response was immediate and calm. "Don't move, Aaron. I'm 20 minutes away. I'm coming." True to his word, he arrived in a beat-up pickup truck, his face etched with concern. He was a former paramedic. He explained, as he expertly assessed my injury, his gentle hands a stark contrast to my family's deafening silence. He stabilized my leg with a makeshift splint and helped me into his truck. The ride to the hospital was a blur of pain and anxiety. Ben stayed with me the entire time, filling out paperwork and talking to the doctors. The diagnosis was a fractured fibula and a severely sprained ankle. They put me in a heavy cast that went from my toes to my knee and gave me a pair of crutches. Driving was out of the question for at least a month. Ben drove me back to the cabin, helped me inside, and made sure I was settled on the sofa with my leg propped up on a mountain of pillows. Before he left, he went on a grocery run for me, stocking the small kitchen with easy-to-prepare foods and essentials. "I'll check on you every day," he promised. "You just focus on resting." I thanked him, my voice thick with unshed tears. He was a stranger, yet he had shown me more care and concern in a few hours than my own parents had in years. As he drove away, I looked at the silent landline, then at my useless cell phone. The silence from my family was no longer just a lack of communication. It felt like a deliberate act, a confirmation of something I had long suspected. I was completely and utterly on my own. The first few days after the accident were a miserable haze of pain and disbelief. The heavy cast on my leg felt like a concrete block, a constant, cumbersome reminder of my immobility. Navigating the small cabin on crutches was a clumsy, exhausting ordeal. Simple tasks, making a cup of tea, getting a book from the shelf, going to the bathroom, became monumental challenges. I'd lose my balance and have to catch myself on a wall, my arms aching from the strain. Sleep was elusive, interrupted by the dull, persistent throb in my leg and the much sharper ache in my heart. Each morning, I would wake up with a fleeting sense of hope, thinking, today they'll call. I'd hobble over to the landline, checking for a dial tone, and then to the small window where my cell phone sat, searching for a single bar of service. Nothing. The silence was absolute. My parents had my itinerary. They knew the cabin's address and its landline number. They knew I was in a remote area with unreliable cell service. My frantic voicemails should have sent them into a panic. A normal parent would have called the local authorities, the park rangers, anyone, to make sure their child was okay. My parents, apparently, were not normal parents. Or perhaps they were, and I was simply not the child who warranted that level of concern. Ben became my lifeline. He'd stop by every morning, bringing fresh coffee and a newspaper from town. He'd check my leg, retighten my bandages, and ask if I needed anything. He'd chop more firewood, even though it was early fall, just to make sure I'd be warm enough at night. We'd sit on the porch, me with my leg propped up, and talk. He told me about his life, how he'd left a high-stress job in the city to run the cabin, rentals his grandfather had built. He listened patiently as I talked about my work, my life, and eventually my family. "They still haven't called?" he asked on day 5, his brow furrowed with a mixture of confusion and pity. I shook my head, staring out at the trees. I'd stopped trying to make excuses for them. The initial explanations I'd fed myself, maybe they lost the number, maybe their phones were off, maybe they were on a trip of their own, had all crumbled into dust. "I left messages," I said, my voice flat. "They know I'm hurt." He didn't press, but I could see the judgment in his eyes. It wasn't directed at me, but at them. His quiet, steady support was the only thing key, keeping me from completely falling apart. He saw my frustration with being cooped up, and one afternoon, he brought over a stack of old DVDs and a small player. "Mountain entertainment," he said with a smile. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. By the end of the first week, my physical pain had started to subside into a manageable ache, but the emotional pain had sharpened into a weapon. The silence was no longer a void. It was a message. It said, "You are not a priority. Your well-being is not our concern." I replayed every recent interaction with my parents in my head, searching for clues. There was the phone call from a month ago, where I declined to contribute several $100s to one of Jessica's business ventures, a get-rich-quick scheme involving overpriced scented candles. "Erin, she's trying to build a future for herself," my dad had said, his tone dripping with disappointment. A little family support would go a long way. When I'd pointed out that I had my own bills to pay, he'd sighed and said, "It's always about you, isn't it?" Then there was the family dinner I'd missed because of a client deadline. Jessica had sent me a picture of them all at the restaurant, smiling, with the caption, "Wish you cared enough to be here." My mom had called the next day to tell me how much they had missed me, a passive-aggressive way of saying how much I had let them down. Each memory was a small cut, but together they were bleeding me dry. I had always been the responsible one, the one who didn't need anything. I'd put myself through college, built my career from scratch, and never asked them for a dime. Jessica, on the other hand, was a black hole of need, and my parents were all too willing to be pulled into her orbit. I had naively believed that if I were ever in real trouble, in a real crisis, they would show up for me. That the fundamental bond of parent and child would override their favoritism. I was wrong. My broken leg wasn't dramatic enough. My quiet, remote suffering wasn't generating enough sympathy. It wasn't a performance, and my family, I was beginning to realize, only responded to performances. As the second week began, a cold, hard anger started to replace the hurt. The girl who had sobbed in pain on a forest floor was gone. In her place was a woman who was seeing her family for what they truly were. The silence wasn't just neglect, it was a choice. They were actively choosing not to contact me, and if they could make that choice, then so could I. I stopped checking the phone with hopeful anticipation. I focused on my recovery. I did the physical therapy exercises the hospital had given me, wincing through the pain. I finished my client project, finding a strange solace in the logical, orderly world of design. I let Ben's quiet kindness be the only family I needed. The 2 weeks I had planned as a peaceful retreat had become a brutal, isolating ordeal. But in that silence, I had found a new kind of clarity. The illusion of my family, the one I had clung to for 28 years, had been shattered. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I could never go back to pretending it was whole. The silence had broken more than just my heart. It had broken the chains of obligation that had bound me to them for my entire life. On the 14th day, the last day of my scheduled trip, I finally managed to get a single, flickering bar of cell service. It appeared for a brief moment as I was sitting on the edge of the porch, my phone resting on the railing at just the right angle. My heart leaped, not with the old hope of seeing a call from my parents, but with a new, practical need to connect with the outside world. I had client emails to answer, bills to pay, and a life to re-engage with, however tentatively. The connection was fragile. I held my breath, afraid that moving even a millimeter would make it vanish. Notifications began to trickle in, a cascade of beeps and buzzes that sounded alien after 2 weeks of near silence. There were emails, texts from a few friends asking where I'd been, and a flood of alerts from social media. I ignored everything else and opened my text messages first, scrolling through them. Nothing from mom or dad. Not a single "Are you okay?" or "Hope the trip was nice." It was a final, definitive confirmation of their indifference, but I felt a strange sense of peace. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, settled resolve. Then, out of habit, I opened Instagram. My feed was the usual mix of vacation photos, sponsored posts, and updates from friends. And then I saw it. It was a post from my cousin Jessica, published 5 days ago. The picture was of her, my mom, and my dad, all grinning for a selfie in a brightly lit restaurant. My dad had his arm around Jessica, pulling her into a hug. My mom was beaming, looking at her with an expression of pure adoration I hadn't seen directed at me in years. They looked happy, carefree, and calm. Completely untroubled. It was the caption, however, that felt like a punch to the gut. It read, "Best family dinner. So amazing to have a stress-free week and finally be free from her nagging and constant negativity. Some people just bring everyone down, you know? So grateful for the ones who lift me up." It was accompanied by a string of hashtags. Family first, positive vibes only, blessed, no drama. I read it once, twice, a third time. There was no doubt who her was. I was the one who was away. I was the one they were free from. The timing was what made it so monstrous. 5 days ago would have been day 9 of my ordeal. I would have been in the cabin, alone, in pain, struggling to get around, wondering why my family had abandoned me. And they had been out to dinner, celebrating my absence. The nagging she referred to was likely my last conversation with my dad, where I'd questioned the wisdom of giving her more money. The negativity was my refusal to applaud her for coasting through life on their dime. The post was a public declaration. It was a victory lap. They weren't just ignoring me, they were reveling in it. They had replaced me, and they were celebrating the upgrade. A wave of nausea rolled over me. I clicked on the comments, my fingers trembling slightly. There were dozens of them, mostly from Jessica's sycophantic friends. "So true, girl, cut out the haters. You deserve all the happiness." But then I saw comments from my own family members. An aunt wrote, "You all look so happy." An uncle commented with a series of clapping emojis. They were all in on it. My entire family was watching this spectacle, implicitly endorsing it. The single bar of service vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, plunging me back into digital silence. But it was too late. The damage was done. The image of their smiling faces was burned into my mind. I sat there on the porch for a long time, the cold autumn air seeping into my bones. The quiet of the forest, which had been a comfort, now felt oppressive, amplifying the roaring in my ears. This wasn't just neglect. This was a deliberate, calculated cruelty. Jessica hadn't just posted a picture, she had crafted a narrative. She was the cherished daughter, and I was the toxic burden they were glad to be rid of. And my parents, by smiling for that camera, by allowing that caption to exist, had co-signed the entire ugly story. I thought about my frantic voicemails. Had they even listened to them? Or had they heard my plea for help and simply deleted it, annoyed by the interruption to their stress-free week? The thought was so vile, so completely monstrous, that I felt a profound shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but it was being rapidly consumed by a white-hot, clarifying rage. They had pushed me out. They had written me off. They thought I was just going to accept it, to crawl back eventually and apologize for whatever imagined slight had caused this, just as I had done so many times before. I had always been the one to smooth things over, to swallow my pride for the sake of a fragile peace. I had let them define me as difficult because it was easier than fighting. But as I sat there, with a broken leg and a shattered heart, I realized that the peace I had been fighting for was a lie. There was no peace to be had with people who could celebrate your absence while you were suffering. Ben found me there an hour later, still staring into space. He took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "Aaron, what is it?" he asked gently. I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud. It felt too humiliating, too pathetic. I just shook my head. "It's my family," I finally managed to say, my voice a croak. "It's worse than I thought." He didn't ask for details. He just sat down in the chair next to mine, a silent, supportive presence against the encroaching darkness. He understood. He had seen their neglect firsthand. He had been the one to help me when they wouldn't. At that moment, his quiet solidarity was worth more than 1,000 empty apologies. The post was a declaration of war. I just hadn't realized I was on a battlefield. But now I did. And they had made a grave miscalculation. They assumed I was the same person I had always been. They didn't know that the girl who had hiked up that mountain was not the same woman who would be coming back down. The drive back to the city was a quiet, 4-hour journey of simmering rage and meticulous planning. Ben had insisted on driving me, his truck easily accommodating my crutches and suitcase. He had packed up my car, a standard sedan impossible for me to drive with my casted right leg, and arranged for it to be transported back later in the week. "You've got enough to deal with," he'd said, refusing any payment. "Just promise you'll take care of yourself." As the mountains receded in the rearview mirror, I felt a chapter of my life closing. The Erin who sought her family's approval, who tolerated disrespect for the sake of harmony, was left behind in that cabin. The woman driving back was someone new, someone forged in silence and betrayal. When Ben dropped me off at my apartment, he gave me a firm, supportive hug. "My offer still stands," he said. "If you ever need to get away from it all again, the cabin is yours, no charge." I was moved by his kindness, a stark contrast to the cruelty I was about to confront. "Thank you, Ben, for everything," I said, and I meant it. His help had been more than practical. It had been a moral anchor in a sea of abandonment. Alone in my apartment, the familiar comfort of my own space did little to soothe me. The Instagram post was a festering wound. It wasn't enough to just cut them off. That would be too easy for them. They would simply spin a story of the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her loving family. No, they needed to understand the consequences of their actions. They needed to feel a fraction of the humiliation and pain they had so casually inflicted on me. Revenge wasn't just about getting even. It was about reclaiming the narrative. My first step was to gather information. I was a designer, and my strength lay in details, in seeing the patterns others missed. I started with Jessica. Her life was an open book, plastered across multiple social media platforms. I spent hours scrolling through her feeds, taking screenshots, and saving images. Her online persona was a carefully curated fiction of a glamorous, successful go-getter. She posted photos from expensive brunch spots, tagged herself at boutique fitness classes, and showed off new outfits with captions about hustling and building her brand. It was all a lie, funded entirely by my parents. But beneath the glossy surface, I started to find cracks. She was careless. In the background of one of her candid coffee shop photos, I noticed a stack of envelopes on the table next to her. I zoomed in. One was a collections notice from a credit card company. In another post, a video of her dancing in her apartment, I caught a glimpse of an eviction warning taped to her front door. She thought she was showing off her carefree life, but she was accidentally broadcasting her own financial ruin. My next target was my parents. Confronting them directly would be useless. They were masters of gaslighting and would twist my words until I was the one apologizing. I needed leverage. I needed proof. I started with our shared family phone plan, which my dad managed. I logged into the account online, something I hadn't done in years. I went through the call logs for the past 3 weeks, and there it was, in black and white. A record of my calls from the cabin's landline on the day of my accident. 1, 2, 3, 4 calls to my dad's cell. 1, 2, 3, 4 calls to my mom's, all of them marked as answered. They hadn't missed my calls. They had answered and then hung up. They had heard my pleas for help and deliberately ignored them. The call logs showed they had then immediately called Jessica. The conversation had lasted for over an hour. My emergency had been an inconvenience to be dismissed before they got back to their real priority. My blood ran cold. This was more than I had even imagined. This was a level of malice that was hard to comprehend. I dug deeper. My dad, an accountant by trade, was meticulous but also arrogant. He believed he was smarter than everyone else. For years, he'd helped me with my taxes, a task I, as a freelancer, found daunting. He had all my financial information, and I realized with a jolt that I had never questioned it. I started going through my own bank records, cross-referencing them with the tax returns he had filed for me. It took me 2 full days, my living room floor covered in statements and legal documents, but I found it. A discrepancy. A small one at first, just a few $100s, categorized under a vague business expense. Then I found another. And another. Over the past 3 years, my father had been systematically skimming money from my accounts. He had been creating fake invoices for professional services and consulting fees from a shell company and paying them from my business account. A shell company that, after a bit more digging into public records, I found was registered to one person, Jessica. The scale of the betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just a few $100s to help Jessica out. It was tens of thousands. My hard-earned money, the profits from my sleepless nights and stressful deadlines, had been siphoned away to fund her fake lifestyle. My dad's constant lectures about financial responsibility, my mom's sighs about how I should be more generous, it was all a massive, orchestrated fraud. They weren't just enabling Jessica, they were my partners in her business, with me as the sole, unwilling investor. The whispers had become screams. The cracks had become chasms. I had a folder on my laptop filled with screenshots, bank statements, call logs, and corporate filings. I had receipts for every lie, every dollar, every moment of their calculated cruelty. I had the truth, and the truth was a weapon. The question was no longer if I would use it, but how. I looked at the cast on my leg, a symbol of their neglect. They had left me broken and alone. They had no idea that in doing so, they had given me the one thing I needed to break them. The cold, hard, and undeniable proof of who they really were. A week passed. I settled into a new routine, one dictated by my crutches and my cold fury. I worked on my projects with a renewed focus, each completed design a small act of defiance. I was proving to myself that I didn't need them. I could stand on my own 2 feet, or at least on 1 foot and 2 crutches. I ignored the single, perfunctory text I received from my mom 4 days after I got back. "Hope you're home safe." I didn't reply. Let them wonder. Let them feel a flicker of the uncertainty I had lived with for 2 weeks. The evidence I had collected sat in a password-protected folder on my computer, a digital bomb waiting to be detonated. I had everything I needed to expose them, the financial fraud, the call logs, the Instagram post. I could go to the police. I could file a lawsuit. I could post it all online and let the court of public opinion tear them to shreds. But that felt too simple, too quick. It didn't address the core of the wound, their belief that I would always be there as a safety net, to be used and discarded at their convenience. I needed to let them walk into their own trap. I needed them to ask me for help. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. It started with a series of frantic, one-sided conversations I overheard. My apartment walls were thin, and my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was hard of hearing and always had her phone on speaker. One afternoon, I heard her talking to her daughter. "Oh, you heard about Jonathan's girl? That Jessica? Apparently she got involved with some very bad people. Owes them a lot of money, from what I hear. Something about a business deal gone wrong." My ears perked up. I hobbled closer to the shared wall, listening intently. "Yes, a terrible shame," Mrs. Gable continued. "They say these people are dangerous. Jonathan and Susan are beside themselves, trying to scrape together the money to pay them off. So, the pyramid scheme candles or whatever other nonsense Jessica was involved in had finally imploded, and her financiers weren't as forgiving as the bank of Mom and Dad. A grim satisfaction settled in my chest. This was it. This was the opening I had been waiting for. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who specialized in financial crimes. I laid out the entire story, showing her the bank statements, the fake invoices, and the Shell Corporation documents. Her eyes widened as she looked through the evidence. "This is airtight, Aaron," she said. "This isn't just a family dispute. It's felony fraud and embezzlement. Your father could face serious jail time." We discussed my options. We could go to the authorities immediately, or we could use this leverage for a different kind of justice. I told her my plan. She raised an eyebrow but nodded slowly. "It's unorthodox," she admitted, "but given the circumstances, it's certainly poetic." She drafted a document for me, a legally binding contract that outlined my terms. It was my price. The call came on a Wednesday evening, exactly 3 weeks after my accident. It was my dad. His voice, usually so confident and booming, was thin and strained. "Aaron, hi honey, we haven't heard from you. We were getting worried." The lie was so audacious, so shameless that I almost laughed. "I've been busy," I said, my voice as cool and flat as a frozen lake. "Oh, Well, listen, the reason I'm calling is something S happened. It's Jessica. He launched into a panicked, convoluted story. Jessica had made a small business mistake. She had partnered with some investors who had turned out to be loan sharks. They were threatening her, making demands. They wanted $50,000 in 3 days or else. "We've pulled together everything we have," he said, his voice cracking. "We've drained our savings, but we're still short. We're $10,000 short. Aaron, I know our relationship has been strained, but she's family. We're desperate. You're the only one who can help us." There it was, the exact phrase from the story title that had haunted my thoughts. You're the only one who can help. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. When I was the one in danger, broken and alone, my pleas were met with silence. But now that their precious Jessica was in trouble, I was suddenly their only hope. I let the silence hang in the air, stretching it out until it was uncomfortable. I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end of the line. $10,000 is a lot of money, Dad, I said finally. I'm not sure I can just come up with that. Please, Aaron, he begged, all pretense of pride gone. We'll pay you back every cent, I swear. This was my moment. This was the crossroads. I could hang up. I could tell him to get lost, or I could execute my plan. I took a deep breath. Okay, I said. I'll help, but not with a loan. This will be a business transaction. I have terms. He was so relieved he would have agreed to anything. Yes, of course. Anything, honey. What do you need? I'm sending you a document, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. It's a contract. You and Mom need to sign it in front of a notary and send it back to me. Once I have the signed and notarized contract, I will transfer the money to you. A contract? What kind of contract? He asked, a hint of suspicion creeping into his voice. You'll see, I said. Read it carefully. I hung up the phone and attached the PDF my lawyer had prepared to an email. I sent it to my dad, my mom, and Jessica, with my lawyer CC'd. The subject line was simple: terms of assistance. Then I waited. The ball was in their court. They wanted my help. They were about to find out the price. And it was going to be so much more than $10,000. The email landed in their inboxes with the force of a grenade. I imagined the scene. My father, Jonathan, opening the attachment, his face shifting from relief to confusion, and then to pure, horrified disbelief. My mother, Susan, peering over his shoulder, her hand flying to her mouth. And Jessica, wherever she was hiding, looking at her phone and realizing her carefully constructed world was about to be set on fire. The contract was a masterpiece of legal retribution. It wasn't just about the $10,000. It was about everything. The document was titled Family Restitution and Dissolution Agreement. It began by stating that I, Aaron, would transfer the sum of $10,000 to Jonathan's account upon the successful execution of the agreement by all parties. The subsequent pages laid out the conditions, the real price of my help. Condition 1. Full and immediate repayment of all misappropriated funds. The contract included an appendix with copies of the fraudulent invoices, the shell company registration under Jessica's name, and the highlighted bank statements. It detailed, to the penny, the $47,850 my father had embezzled from my business account over 3 years. It stipulated that this amount was to be repaid to me, with interest, within 90 days. Condition 2. Cession of all parental rights to shared assets. My grandmother, my dad's mom, had left her small house to both my dad and me in her will, with each of us owning 50%. The contract demanded that my father sign over his 50% share to me, effective immediately. The house wasn't worth a fortune, but it was a place filled with happy childhood memories, a place I loved. It was my only real inheritance, and he was about to lose his half of it. Condition 3. A public admission and apology. Jessica was required to post a public statement on all her social media platforms. The text was pre-written in the contract. It was a clear, unambiguous confession. I want to publicly apologize to my cousin, Aaron. For the past several years, I have been living a lie, funded by money that was stolen from her by my uncle, her father. The lifestyle I have portrayed online was a fraud. On the week Aaron broke her leg and was stranded alone, I posted cruel and untrue things about her while my family celebrated. I am deeply sorry for the pain, deceit, and betrayal. I will be deleting my social media accounts to focus on making amends and taking responsibility for my actions. Condition 4. A legally binding no-contact order. Upon signing, all three of them, Jonathan, Susan, and Jessica, would agree to have no further contact with me, directly or indirectly, for the rest of their lives. Any attempt to contact me would be a breach of contract, with severe financial penalties. The final clause stated that if any of these conditions were not met, or if they refused to sign, the full dossier of evidence, along with the contract itself, would be immediately forwarded to the district attorney's office and the IRS. My lawyer's name and contact information were listed at the bottom. It was checkmate. Less than an hour after I sent the email, my phone rang. It was my father. He was screaming, "What is this? Are you insane? This is blackmail. This is exto." Artian, I held the phone away from my ear, waiting for him to run out of steam. I didn't say a word. "How could you do this to your own family?" he sputtered. "After everything we've done for you." "Let's talk about what you've done for me, Dad," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Did you do anything for me when you answered my calls from a landline, heard me begging for help with a broken leg, and then hung up on me? Did you do anything for me when you spent 3 years stealing money from my business to give to your favorite niece? The money I earned working 60-hour weeks? You have 2 options. You can sign the paper, get the $10,000 to save Jessica from her mess, and begin the process of paying me back what you stole. Or you cannot sign it, and I will hand everything over to the police. Jessica can deal with her loan sharks, and you can explain the fraud and embezzlement charges to a judge. The choice is yours. You have 24 hours to get the notarized document to my lawyer's office." I hung up. The next few hours were a chaotic symphony of desperation. My mother called, sobbing, "Aaron, please, don't do this. You're tearing this family apart." "You're wrong, Mom," I replied, my heart a cold, hard stone. "You already did that. You did it when you smiled for that picture, when you let Dad steal from me, when you chose silence over your own daughter. This isn't me tearing us apart. This is me cleaning up the mess you made." Jessica sent a barrage of texts, alternating between threats, "You'll regret this, you bitter witch," and pathetic pleas, "Please, Aaron, they're going to hurt me. Don't let them." I didn't respond to any of them. I just forwarded them to my lawyer to add to the file. The deadline I gave them was 5 p.m. the next day. All day, I sat in my apartment, watching the clock. A part of me wondered if they would call my bluff. Their pride and arrogance were so immense, they might just choose self-destruction over admitting fault. But their cowardice was stronger. At 4:15 p.m., I received an email from my lawyer. It was a scanned copy of the signed and notarized agreement. Every signature was there: Jonathan's, a spidery scrawl; Susan's, shaky and tear-stained; Jessica's, an angry, defiant slash. They had folded. They had chosen the path of humiliation over the path of incarceration. I logged into my bank account and transferred the $10,000. Then, I blocked their numbers. I blocked them on all social media. As I did, I saw that Jessica had already posted the apology. The comments were a firestorm of shock and confusion from her followers. An hour later, her accounts were gone. It was over. The confrontation hadn't been a shouting match or a tearful reunion. It had been a business transaction. Cold, clean, and brutally efficient. I had bought my freedom, and the price had been their dignity, their money, and their future. I sat back on my sofa, propped my casted leg up, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of profound, quiet peace. In the months that followed, the terms of the agreement were executed with the cold precision of a legal document. The silence from my former family was absolute, a void I welcomed like a soft blanket. The first installment of the stolen money arrived in my bank account exactly 30 days after the contract was signed, a notification on my phone that felt less like a victory and more like a closing statement. The subsequent payments arrived on time, every time. I imagined my father, the proud sales manager, having to sell assets, work overtime, or humble himself in ways he never thought possible. The thought brought me a grim, quiet satisfaction. The deed for my grandmother's house arrived via courier, the paperwork transferring his half to me, clean and final. I plan to visit in the spring to reclaim the space not as a shared inheritance, but as my own personal sanctuary. Life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. Without the constant, low-level stress of my family drama, I felt lighter. My creativity at work flourished. I took on new clients, more ambitious projects, and my freelance business grew stronger than ever. The cast eventually came off my leg, replaced by a walking boot, and then, finally, nothing but a slight limp that faded with physical therapy. The scar on my ankle was a faint, silvery line, a permanent reminder not of my weakness, but of my strength. It was a testament to the fact that I had survived, healed, and walked away on my own terms. One of the most unexpected outcomes was my friendship with Ben. We had stayed in touch after he dropped me off in the city. He'd text every few days to see how my leg was healing, or to send a picture of a sunrise over the mountains. His steady, unassuming kindness had been a beacon during my darkest time. When my leg was fully healed, I took him up on his offer and drove back to the cabin for a weekend. It felt different this time. The cabin was no longer a place of isolation and betrayal, but one of clarity and rebirth. We hiked a gentle trail, me moving cautiously but confidently, and sat on the porch, talking for hours. There was an easy comfort between us, a connection forged in a crisis that was slowly blossoming into something more. It was new and tentative, but it felt real and hopeful, a stark contrast to the transactional relationships I had left behind. I did, on one occasion, hear about my old family through the grapevine. Mrs. Gable, my neighbor, mentioned it during a chat in the hallway. She said Jonathan and Susan had sold their house and moved to a smaller condo across town. Dee heard Jonathan had lost his job and was working a lower-paying one. Jessica, she said, had moved in with them. She was working 2 retail jobs and, by all accounts, was miserable. The glamorous influencer was gone, replaced by a young woman forced to face the mundane reality of earning a living. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a sense of cosmic balance. They had built their lives on a foundation of deceit and my money, and without it, their entire structure had collapsed. They had gotten what they deserved. My life, on the other hand, was being rebuilt on a new foundation, one of honesty, self-respect, and genuine connection. I reconnected with old friends who I had drifted away from, no longer having to make excuses for my family's behavior or navigate their toxic demands on my time. I traveled, taking a trip to the coast just because I could, feeling the salty air on my face and a profound sense of freedom. The $10,000 I had given them was the best money I had ever spent. It wasn't a bailout, it was a severance package. It was the price I paid to formally resign from the role of the family scapegoat and start a new life as the architect of my own happiness. Sometimes, when I'm working late in my quiet apartment, I'll look at the scar on my ankle. I remember the pain, the fear, and the crushing loneliness of those 2 weeks in the woods. But then I remember the silence and the strength I found within it. I remember a stranger's kindness and a cousin's cruelty. I remember the moment I decided to stop being a victim and start fighting back. My family thought they had broken me, but they only broke the chains that held me to them. They left me in the dark, not realizing they had given me the chance to find my own light. And on my new path forward, that light is more than enough.